Moderate and progressive Democrats are divided in Nevada at a time when the party desperately needs to come together. The party is trying to keep key seats in next year's midterm elections. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto and Governor Steve Sisolak are both running for re-election. But as Politico notes, there is, quote, a war between Harry Reid's political machine and pro-Bernie Sanders forces. In 2020, President Biden barely saw victory in the swing state with a win of just 2 percentage points. The Nevada Democratic victory does not have access to the state Democratic Party's voter file, which is problematic for the party nationwide. Meanwhile, Republican presidential hopefuls gathered in Nevada over the weekend where they touted the party's successes. For more, let's bring in Elizabeth Thompson. She is the editor of the Nevada Independent. Elizabeth, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So how is support for Senator Bernie Sanders complicating things for Nevada Democrats?
Thanks for having me, Elaine. It's yet to be seen just how much it complicates things as we approach the election. But things are certainly sticky right now. As you noted in your opening remarks, their voter data is being fought over as we speak between the existing state party, which was taken over by progressive forces, pro-Bernie Sanders, socialist democratic forces a few months back. And now the Reid machine, as we call it here in Nevada, has replanted itself basically in the guise of the Washoe Democratic Party. So this is a county party up north, and so Democratic victory is operating there. I understand there are negotiations going on over the voter files and also over all the money that's going to be raised one way or another.
Interesting. Well, this rift between moderates and progressives is, of course, not unique to Nevada. But what are the possible consequences for next year's midterm should the conflict go unresolved?
Well, the voter data is the key thing, and I am not thinking that the DNC is going to let the fight go on too much longer. The DNC obviously cares deeply about holding Nevada's Senate seat, that's Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, and so I'm assuming they'll do what they need to do to get their hands on those voter files, whatever the case may be. Then it's going to be a matter of which competing group can raise more money, and are they willing to ultimately compromise in order to support the candidates on the ballots, whether that means perhaps the state party would handle a certain part of the ballot and Democratic victory operating out of Washoe County would maybe handle the candidates towards the top of the ticket. To some degree, that's up to the candidates in Nevada. So that'll be very interesting to see which of them choose to go with which of these operative groups.
Yeah, let's dig into this data issue a bit more. Explain to us how voter data became a casualty of Democrats' infighting and who stands to suffer as a result.
So essentially, the state party is responsible in each state across the nation, not just Nevada, for collecting voter data. These voter files consist of the name of the voter, their address, how they voted in the past, and in some cases, what issues are their hot button issues. So it's valuable information. The state party owns it. So Harry Reid's machine right now do not have their hands on the most recent voter data. So if they or the DNC cannot cut a deal with the state party, and if the state party decides to dig in its heels and not share the voter data, the Democrats are definitely going to have a problem. I don't see it going that far. I'm assuming that the parties will find a way to come to an agreement on this data, probably, I would say, right about the time we're talking about filing in March.
Yeah, well, according to the Wall Street Journal, Nevada's 3rd congressional district was the nation's most competitive on average over the past 3 presidential elections. How is this district a bellwether for Democrats heading into the midterms?
That's such a good question. We love to talk about CD3 here in Nevada. It's a huge district, one of the largest districts in the country. It has been considered a swing district since its inception, really. It has changed hands a number of times between the two parties, generally pretty close. But we have something else going on in Nevada right now, which is going to make CD3 even more interesting. Not only does the voter data matter so that the candidates can do their best to win votes in that area, but redistricting is afoot here in Nevada. Our legislature is going to convene for a special session later this week where districts will be redrawn. And once that happens, then this voter data is really going to be front and center in conversation for folks involved in elections here.
Well, a number of potential presidential hopefuls came to Las Vegas for the Republican Jewish coalition. Former President Trump appeared via video message. Who were some of the headliners, and how did Governor Chris Christie address Mr. Trump's presidency?
Gosh, it was definitely the who's who of Republicans. I mean, we had, as you mentioned, Chris Christie was here, Lindsey Graham here, DeSantis, former Vice President Mike Pence. I could go on and on. It's probably the top 20 Republicans in the country were present at the event. This is an annual gala that happens at the Venetian, which is formerly owned by Sheldon Adelson, one of the biggest GOP donors in the country. What was interesting, to answer your question, though, is that Chris Christie talked in his remarks about moving on and moving forward. I think we could probably interpret that to mean that Mr. Christie would prefer not to be talking about Donald Trump. However, Donald Trump was piped into this event, invited to give remarks. That's not surprising because of Trump's friendly relationship with Israel and in regards to moving the Israeli capital to Jerusalem. Trump has a huge following in this particular political group, and those who showed up to speak, I'm sure were not disappointed to hear some nice words from the former president.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about that dynamic, Elizabeth, the former governor of New Jersey there, looking ahead or wanting to shift the focus ahead, while at the same time the Republican Party's standard bearer making it clear he has no intention of doing that. All right, Elizabeth Thompson, good to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining us.